So it's so great to be here again. I was saying I come so that I can listen to the incredible talks. But so true to Dr. Mishra's always try and be better, Gordy and I have done this twice before where he interviewed me, and I was sort of saying, well, Gordy, we both, the last 40 years of the tech industry, we've been kind of in the middle of it, and you have so many interesting stories, and I get that as, you know, the lead person at Fenwick and a client attorney privilege, you're reticent to talk, but could we kind of discuss the tech industry? It might be interesting to people. And we'll try and save time. There's no clock, but is there? Save a few minutes for questions about the tech industry and just the people and what kind of made everybody do what they did, and then, you know, some of the front and center issues that are here now that tech has become ubiquitous.
Well, let me just say at the beginning that we made this decision at 9 p.m. last night, and I said, okay, Diane, we'll call an audible. And she said, what's that?
I said, well, I've heard of it. But Gordy and I originally bonded over sailing and ice hockey.
Yeah.
I founded UVM's, University of Vermont's ice hockey team, played ice hockey, and I was also a women's national sailing champion. And Gordy, you...
I had no such honors, but I played a lot of hockey when I was young, and I've since turned to sailing, and I've gotten more injuries in sailing than I did in hockey. But okay. We both have a love for both sports.
One of the strongest women I've ever hired in tech, when I met her, I just liked her immediately. At my second meeting, I found out she'd played varsity ice hockey all 4 years at Yale. So I like people with a military background and an ice hockey background. Okay, so Gordy studied engineering at Stanford, and it was interesting asking him about it, how they instilled entrepreneurship. What year was this?
Oh, beginning in 1966.
And what was?
Oh, the engineering courses, yeah. Every engineering course I took began with 2 videos. One was the founding of Hewlett-Packard, and famously it started in a garage in Palo Alto. There's a model of it over in the engineering school, and how Hewlett and Packard were graduate students and developed this oscillator. And the first customer was Walt Disney, and they bought 14 of the units to do the sound mixing for Fantasia. And what a great story, and you know, entrepreneurship was inculcated in everybody who took engineering. Then the other video was one that Diane has seen, which is the video of the bridge in Seattle, the Tacoma Narrows.
Are there any
bridge.
Engineering majors here?
And any of you seen the Tacoma Narrows?
How many of you saw
bridge?
this film?
The Tacoma Narrows.
It's so interesting because when I took engineering, it was,
yeah, so
we saw it several times.
There was all this inspiration to do something, and the entrepreneurial, and there's this picture of this bridge in a storm, and the wind is just blowing at a certain cadence, and it hit the harmonic frequency of the bridge cables, and it just got swaying out of control, and then it snapped, and cars fell into the water, and so that falls into the category of the Bill Campbell admonition: don't F up. So we were all inspired to be engineers, but you know, be careful and do it right.
Yeah. And you were lucky enough to grow up out here with Stanford, and your first job was at SRI, where the famous Doug Engelbert was, and you told me.
Yeah, it was such a perfect time and place to come into the workforce. A friend of mine had worked at Stanford Research Institute, now called SRI, in what was called the Augmentation Research Lab, headed by a famous guy named Doug Engelbart, who invented the mouse, and frankly, it wasn't Al Gore who invented the internet, it was actually Doug Engelbart and a couple of his colleagues, and that all happened about a year before I graduated, and I was lucky to get a summer job there and met many of the luminaries, who pioneers of the computer industry. And many of them started other companies, and the Xerox
Yeah,
part.
but he did something known as the mother of all demos.
Yeah,
This guy was so visionary, so low key and so visionary, and and so you saw the video of that demo, and
Yeah, it was amazing.
it was obvious to you.
It was just something was happening here. This is just another leap of imagination and technology. Engelbart, by the way, in German means angel beard, and he had a long white beard and blue eyes, and just radar lock when you're talking to him, and it was just mesmerizing to speak to him.
But I don't know if you've had those moments where you all of a sudden realize things are going to change and you're seeing a bit of glimpse of the future. I went to Cal, and I remember Xerox PARC came recruiting, and they had this thing called the Alto, which had, Steve Jobs famously got his ideas for the Mac from Xerox PARC. And this computer, which didn't make it, it needed a Steve Jobs to bring it to market, but it had Windows and a graphical interface, and I remember, all I had seen was an IBM PC, and looking at this thing and trying to get my head around what it meant, because it was clearly going to change everything. And it's so interesting, and I'm on the board of Stripe, a company, Stripe, that's a payments company right now, and I was talking to the founder, Patrick Collison, the other day, and he was saying he was asking what the iPhone meant to me, and I said, well, what did it mean to you when it was launched? Well, he was an MIT undergraduate when it was launched. He'd come over from Ireland, a little town in Ireland, and when the iPhone got launched, he said, that's going to change everything, that's going to revolutionize everything, and he dropped out of MIT and became an entrepreneur.
Back to Doug Engelbart for a moment.
Yeah.
In 1968, he famously predicted, holding up a mouse in his hand, he said, in 20 or 30 years, you'll be able to hold in your hand all of the computing power that exists on Earth today. And that was 1968. In 2007, Steve Jobs introduced that device. It wasn't 20 years, but it was about 38 years or something like that. It was 39 years. So
amazing.
close.
We have the benefit of age to see these things, actually. See people predict it and then see it happen. And we're not all going to see it predicted, but recognizing when it's there is it's good to be awake to do that. It's good to be vital so you can do that. Yeah, and you mentioned, Tech is interesting. I always maintain that the most entrepreneurial people are the bad guys because they're so opportunistic. And so, I founded a streaming video in 1995, and the first people to want to use it were pornographers. And we said no, and we had nothing to lose. We weren't making any money yet anyhow. But I was asking you about Fenwick. You joined Fenwick the same year Microsoft was founded. Was it a tech firm there, and why did you join it? And then you mentioned on the phone that Bill Fenwick, the founder, actually did foresee a lot of this, and you didn't explain that. I was intrigued.
Yeah, he predicted that computers would revolutionize everything and the access to information, and he predicted that the flip side of that would be privacy, and that privacy would be a big responsibility of lawyers. And that was true. There was a little.
That's amazing.
There was a Privacy Act in the 70s and so on. So there was a little bit of that, but now it's just ballooned.
Well, it's the dominant
it's the
problem
yeah.
is our data and the privacy around it.
Right.
And what gets done with that data. Another person that saw what was going on is Bill, actually, because he was at Kodak.
Yeah.
And he said, I'm going to Silicon Valley. And you met him shortly after that?
Did, yes. We were, I joined a startup law firm, actually, that when I joined it, had only one client. It was Pioneer Stereo. Have any of you ever seen a Pioneer Stereo? Well, we all had them when we were in college, but technology has moved on. But it was a high-end audio product. And when Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak were looking for lawyers, they interviewed a dozen law firms. And they hired us because we emphasized that we represented Pioneer. We didn't emphasize that it was our only client at the time, but Steve and Steve weren't starting a computer company. They were starting a consumer entertainment company, and they valued our experience, particularly with the distribution through the retail chain of Pioneer. And a lot of what we did for Apple and Bill in the early days was managing the retail chain, because Apple didn't have a sales force. It's a retail product, and so they're distributors, they're retailers. And the retailers misbehave in many ways. They discount the product and don't really give enough customer service. And that was similar to Pioneer and Apple. And when Bill was hired by John Scully, actually, in around 1984, Bill was responsible for reorganizing the retail chain. And we got into a lot of trouble together in that, but Bill was pretty aggressive, and
he always threw himself into everything.
He jumped into it, and some of the retailers weren't behaving, and he wanted to terminate them. And Bill obviously was competitive. He also kind of had this impish sense of humor. The inside lawyers at the company were very conservative and didn't want to terminate the dealers because they would sue. And so Bill asked us whether we thought we could defend the case. We said we thought we could. And so he waited until the inside lawyer was on vacation on a boat off the coast and couldn't be reached, and terminated all the distributors. When the lawyer came back, we were in lawsuits. So Bill and I bonded over that, and kind of grew up together in Silicon Valley.
Wow. The other story I love hearing from Bill, how many of you are familiar with the famous Super Bowl ad that introduced the Macintosh in 1984? Anybody that hasn't seen it, I encourage you to go back and watch it. That was very controversial, and Bill was one of the few people that said, go with it. And it was a huge ad. But I was just reflecting last night, this ad is about, it says 1984 will not be 1984 because of the Macintosh. And the unbelievable irony of it is 1984, which is sort of, you could say, surveillance capitalism, is actually now here in 2019. Just a huge irony.
Big Brother and thought control. I mean,
there's a documentary out, The Great Hack, about Cambridge Analytica that explains all this. Amazing. Okay, next big thing I think you were involved in, and with Bill, had to do with antitrust. You got involved with Intuit, and Microsoft wanted to buy Intuit.
Yeah, that was another adventure where we bonded, and I can tell a couple of funny stories about that too. First of all, Bill, after Apple spun off a software subsidiary called Claris that was going to be independent and go public. Apple changed its mind and reversed direction and reabsorbed Claris. So Bill quit because he wanted to, run a company. He didn't want to go back to working at Apple. He started a company called Go, which was a pen computing company, really the precursor of iPads and
it was ahead of its time. It failed because it was ahead of its time, but it was really
failed.
prescient.
And Bill always said, the company was called Go, Going, Gone. And so Bill needed another job at about the time that Scott Cook needed a CEO at Intuit. And John Doerr connected them, famous venture capitalist, and hired Bill in 1994. We had taken the company public at the end of 93, and Intuit was worth, at public offering time, $100 million market cap. Six months into Bill's tenure, Scott Cook receives an email, and it's captioned, "This really is Bill Gates." So it was an email from Bill Gates, and he just said, "This really is Bill Gates. And I'd like to meet with you and talk to you about acquiring your company." And so Scott verified that, talked to Bill Gates, and we flew up to Seattle to negotiate the deal with Microsoft. And we had enormous questions because Microsoft was under investigation for antitrust then to begin with. And Intuit's only product was Quicken. Intuit doesn't even have Quicken anymore. There's Quicken exists, but it's an independent company. But it was personal finance software, balance your checkbook on a Mac, really. And Microsoft was trying to compete in that area. It created its own product called Money and couldn't compete with Intuit. Their brand and the market position was such that they just wanted to buy it. And we were worried that that would be an antitrust problem because Intuit had an 80% market share and Microsoft was the only other competitor. So we asked Microsoft what they thought the chances of getting this through the Justice Department would be in antitrust review, and they said 80%. And we were pretty skeptical. We had to be careful about that because it could take a long time.
Bill Gates is very competitive, and if he wants something, he'll push for it.
And so here's Bill. He just ran Go, and Go went away. Now he's just had come to Intuit. He's been there less than a year, and he's going to become part of Microsoft, and he left. So this wasn't in his game plan, but he was a leader and said, okay, we'll do it, and we'll make it happen. But because of the antitrust risk, we're going to run it like it's not happening. And when we announced the deal, Intuit was a campus in Menlo Park, had a big tent, 300 employees or so, all under the tent. And Bill Gates flew down, Scott Cook came down, and Bill Gates gave a pep talk to the company about how great it was going to be part of Microsoft. Scott Cook gave a pep talk how great it was going to be. And Bill got up and kind of walked up and kind of stared at his shoes and said, I'd be lying to you if this isn't bittersweet for me. This isn't why I came here, and we thought of Microsoft as Darth Vader, and this is with Bill Gates on the stage, and but this is going to be good for Intuit. And in the meantime, we're going to run the company like it's not happening. Get back to work. And it was a 9-10 month process through the Department of Justice. We eventually got sued, and they blocked the merger. And it was only because of Bill's extraordinary stewardship of the company that it was operating like it wasn't going to happen. And there was a same tent to announce this to the employees. And by the way, when I was sitting in the back of the tent at the announcement of the deal signing, and when Bill gave that speech, everybody around me was in tears. And they just didn't want to get acquired by Microsoft and the whole idea. And it was obvious that Bill Campbell wasn't going to be part of it going forward. Same tent, 10 months later, Bill got up and announced that the deal was off. The Justice Department had blocked it. And everybody stood up and applauded. And it was a celebration to be.
And now what's the market cap?
The market cap, I just looked it up, $70 billion.
Amazing.
That deal was for 1.5, so it was certainly a big payday if it had happened then. But that's the best deal that didn't happen to Scott Cook.
Yeah, Scott's a pretty big Bill Campbell and Gordy Davidson fan. Okay, just
one quick story.
Yeah, okay.
It's a great Bill story. First of all, I came here channeling Bill, right? So Bill only dressed from the Land's End catalog. So I've got the whole ensemble here. He wore penny loafers. I haven't worn my penny loafers in 20 years, but I brought them here today for you. We had flown up to Microsoft on a Sunday in business suits because it was the day, and when business suits were the order of the day. And we thought we were going for the afternoon. We stayed until Thursday afternoon to get the deal done. And we weren't allowed off the Microsoft campus. It was a super secret thing. We were in the same room with pizza, and the room smelled bad after a couple of days of not changing your clothes or having pizza for every meal. And Bill finally called a timeout and said, "We're going shopping." So we went to Sears, and he bought us all, underwear and sweaters, and it's just a whole new wardrobe that was Bill, and just to lighten it up. And
Did you keep wearing those clothes after you got back?
Oh yes, we kept them. Sure. Anyway.
Yeah, that's classic. I can remember.
Even in a tense situation, he made things fun.
Yeah, that was one of the first things he did at the start of a board meeting. If any of the men in the room dared wear some kind of loud shirt, he would publicly kind of humiliate their shirt.
Yeah, where'd you get that shirt?
It was
Clean it
funny.
and bury it.
You could count on it.
Yeah.
Made me want to wear loud shirts. Anyhow, just changing the subject a little bit, one of the lessons I kind of learned in the tech industry was, how everything's changing so fast, and so you have to constantly adapt, and you constantly reinvent yourself. Well, life is kind of like that. We've been hearing about that today, about people reinventing themselves. One of my first companies, first I was a naval architect, then I switched to computer science, and I worked at Tandem, which was one of the original transaction processing and big enterprise companies that actually Gordy happened. He's helped every company I've ever been affiliated with, but even VMware. And but anyhow, at Tandem, they were old and they were a closed system, and I got to work with the chief architect, and we were telling them they had to move into the open world, the open source world, called the Linux world. And they were saying, we can't do that. And a friend of mine, David Sheridan, who's a emeritus professor at Stanford of computer science, I used to windsurf with him, and we were windsurfing one day, and I was complaining about this, and he goes, yeah. And I've always loved this metaphor. He said, it's like they're sitting on top of this big, fat elephant. It's so comfy, ambling along. It's headed right towards the cliff, and there's this scrawny, mangy donkey going the other way, the open source world, and they just can't jump off onto the donkey. And I've always, have you seen that? That kind of problem in all the companies you've worked with. This is a new question.
Yeah, we should talk about VMware, actually.
Because we didn't jump off onto the donkey?
Right. Well, no, it's just the innovation in Silicon Valley is incredible.
Yes.
Sheraton had started many companies.
Yes, he did, when he was a seed investor in Google.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. And that's really the power of Silicon Valley, is to kind of just do the unconventional thing and re-architect the way everybody thinks.
Yeah, I would say so. And what's interesting about your career, Gordy, is that you kind of did an unconventional thing, because you joined this law firm. You worked with Oracle, you worked with Facebook, Cisco, on, and I think you mentioned 3 of them asked you to come be their general counsel, where had he done that, he would have had an easier life, because the more control of his time, and he would have made huge amounts of money. I think he's not, he can pay his mortgage, but huge amounts of money. So who asked you to be their general counsel, and why did you stay at Fenwick?
I had opportunities at Apple, Electronic Arts, and Oracle. And,
unbelievable.
At early times, at exciting times, and they probably were all each $100 million or more opportunity in terms of equity. But I decided not to do that. I was in private practice for 2 reasons. One is, in private practice, you have this kaleidoscope of working with all these companies, and you see the variety of things that are being done, and it's just stimulating every day. And then the other one is, as an outside lawyer, you're independent. And we've talked about ethics, and we get into that. When you're an inside lawyer, you're not independent, because you're always afraid that if you give advice that the company doesn't like, you'll get fired. And so there's just a pressure to say yes. And by the way, I mean, I think our jobs as lawyers, I'm an engineer really more than a lawyer. I think our job as lawyers is to solve problems, not to say no. And too many people graduate from law school learning to spot the problems and not the opportunities. And I think that the engineering training I had always taught me to find a way to get it done, but a legal way. And with all of these companies, all of those companies, and all of the big companies you've mentioned, the CEOs are driven. They're spectacularly insightful. They're charismatic, but they don't like anybody to say no. And so there's this pressure to just go with what the CEO wants to do. And I found that I had influence that the inside lawyers didn't have over these strong personalities. You still can't contradict them in public or get in the way of the inspirational speech, but take them aside and say, what you're trying to do is not going to work, but there's another way to get there. And let's back off this plan and let's try that plan. And I had more ability to dissuade them from things that I thought would have been mistakes. Mm-hmm. And I realized that if I had gone in-house, I would have lost that independence. And it just...
Yeah, it's a pretty remarkable story, because there are a lot of people from law firms that jump ship to join the companies, and they've had wonderful careers and done significant things, but it's a very interesting story. Another thing interesting when you think about the legal, it came up last night when we were talking that you can use legal things to be unethical, and I was just telling Gordy that I heard the former chief operating officer of Cambridge Analytica, which was the company that took the Facebook data and used it to kind of hack people's minds about what they thought and affected the election. And anyhow, the chief operating officer said, he feels very badly, and he was kind of trying to defend what they had done. And he said, well, we made sure we were legal. We dotted every I, we crossed every T, we obeyed all the regulation, we knew we were legal. And he goes, now in hindsight, I realize we didn't spend any time thinking about whether we were being ethical. And that's an interesting, where does ethics and the law intersect?
Yeah, we've seen this over and over again. The new technologies are envisioned to enable people, connect people, break down barriers, and the entrepreneurs see the opportunities, and the bad guys also see the opportunities. And no matter what you do, pour into it. Bad guy, quick TurboTax. Bad guys hack somebody else, get somebody's social security number, file fake tax returns using QuickBooks to get refunds. They file a tax return that shows that they have refunds because they have somebody else's social security
number.
Although
they are breaking the law.
They're breaking the law. But no. But Intuit didn't realize that they were enabling these bad guys.
Right, exactly.
Until it became a big thing. And then suddenly there needed to be more privacy protection and so forth. And 5-6 years ago, there was a big controversy over that, and all of the tax, and it wasn't Intuit alone. All of the H&R Block and everybody had the same problem.
You could argue that Google and Facebook said, well, we were just enabling everybody to talk to each other and connect to each other and play any video they wanted to play on the internet and say anything they wanted to say on the internet. Oh, there's a problem with that.
Right. But in the old days, you had to read a newspaper, write a letter, call somebody up. Now you can influence millions of people.
Billions.
With a tweet, with a fake posting, just everyone is empowered to do instant communications in a way that the law can't catch up to it, and the companies can't. Can't keep
so technology is leading the law and the regulatory now because it is moving so fast. So it's interesting. So with that, I think we're running out of time. So if there's any questions, we've covered pretty much everything in tech in one way or another. Please feel free to ask questions. There's one back there. So what are any big issues we've seen that early stage entrepreneurs have? You know, I spend a lot of time with early stage entrepreneurs. And it's, you know what's interesting to me? I've seen an evolution. This whole notion of a learning mindset has become so accepted. I am completely amazed by the audacity of these entrepreneurs to make sure they seek out very experienced people and pick their brains. Sometimes I feel like, okay, you took my whole brain away, I have nothing left. They have so many questions. But I'm super impressed because it never occurred to me to do that when I was starting out as an entrepreneur. But then, you know, in terms of issues, sometimes people, you know, you're so hopeful when you're building something and you have to, well, two issues I've seen. One, they over-listen to people that are willing to tell them what's not gonna work. And when you're an entrepreneur, you're the expert in what you're doing. So if some very famous person tells you that's not gonna work, you should do it this way, but they don't know as much about what you're doing as you do, and you can find a fallacy in what they're saying, it's okay to ignore them. And a lot of entrepreneurs think they don't trust themselves enough. But then there's the flip side of trusting themselves so much that they don't see reality, so it's kind of a balance.
Yeah, and to take it back to things we've learned from Bill Campbell, you know, the entrepreneurs are brilliant, but they're not necessarily prepared to manage people. And so the Bill Campbellism, you know, your title makes you a manager, but your people make you a leader. You know, I think the entrepreneurs usually have a brilliant idea. They understand their domain. It's very narrow, but they don't necessarily know how to harness the power of an organization that's growing.
Yeah, I always encourage everybody to write down a vision and a set of principles when they're starting out. And when you write down those principles, it helps set the culture of the company. And, you know, inevitably, respect other people will kind of be in those principles, and it helps people be more of a leader, I think. Okay. Yeah, another question?
Question here?
Yeah.
Going back to the privacy and information with big
Yeah.
companies, do you think that there will be any change? Is it such a dog-eat-dog world, access to most information, affect the most people, have the most influence? I mean, they can say in the media, we're going to do better, but if they try to be more ethical, do you feel like they think that they might be taking a step back against the competition?
So repeat the question.
Yeah, so the question was, in privacy, will there be a step back because of the pressure to meet competition? You know, first of all, regulation is here. I mean, the GDPR in Europe, the California law that's about to go into effect. I mean, privacy and security.
GDPR says you have to be able to erase things if asked.
The right to be forgotten,
yeah.
for example.
Yeah.
And permission to use your information has to be
Yes.
granted in advance. So the principles
Why
there
any
that-
European website asks if it's okay to
And
do it.
so I mean, that's something that Europe has always valued in a way that the United States hasn't done in legal terms. But it's coming here, and it's obviously being required by customers. So that we haven't hit the full brunt of that regulation or that blowback from customers. I mean, the obvious one is these smart speakers. Hey Siri, you know, Alexa, so forth. We don't have one of those in our home because my wife thinks that they're always listening. And of course they're always listening. It's not just when you wake them up. And now that's become a controversy because that people are listening, they're listening to help the voice recognition. They're not listening to, hopefully they're not listening to gather information.
Yeah, but the problem is, just to play devil's advocate, is contractors are listening,
Right.
and what are those contractors doing with what they're hearing?
Yeah. But so here's something that's a really convenient way, and our grandchildren are learning how to do these. And,
There's a lot of good in it.
Except that they can now order things, and anyway, and they get delivered. And who ordered this? But but I think there will be a blowback from customers too, because at some point it's unintended consequences.
It's a very interesting time. So and there's two things. One is the international aspect of it, because of the power of this sort of knowing everything about everybody. Different countries are saying, like, this is mine and it can't leave my country, and by the way, I'm the government and I need to be able to get access to any of this. And that's happening in both China and the US, actually. And so what does that mean, when you're giving away all this information about yourself, and who knows who's going to ask for it and what they're going to do with it? That was why I was saying the irony of the 1984 Super Bowl ad. But there's that, and then there's this lifelong problem or tech lifetime problem that I think needs to be solved, in that it's sort of an odd, the reason we have all these free things is because your information is being sold to advertisers. So the customer is different from the user. And I'm an enterprise person, and in the enterprise, your customer is your user, so there's no conflict. And I think that's part of what we're grappling with.
Mark, how are we doing on time? Where's Mark?
Yeah, 2 more questions.
Okay, 2 more questions. There are 2 right there.
So when you speak to entrepreneurs and they're looking to scale their business, what's some advice that you give them?
What's advice to an entrepreneur about scaling your business? One of the things, a really cheap, inexpensive tool, which is the same advice you just got this morning about vitality. It said, what is your headline? I say to entrepreneurs, imagine, I pick a number of years based on where they are and what they're doing, and pick your favorite publication, whether it's Fortune or the New York Times or whatever it is, and they're doing a thorough story about your company because of your success. Write that story for me. Okay, now you have a clear vision of where you're trying to get to. I always say, have a really big vision, but then you've got to work backwards into small, tractable steps. And the only thing, where they're almost on a 3-month time frame. And they don't have to necessarily produce revenue, but they have to produce value each step. And it's not, so marketing is not producing value. What's producing value is a product that people love and want to use, okay? So work back how you're going to get there in these bite-sized steps where each step creates some value. And by doing the further out vision, you have a sense of how big you're going to have to get, who you're going to have to be able to touch to get there, because this story should cover all aspects of the company, not just the product and engineering, but also sales and marketing and how you want to market.
And behind.
Brad and Smithy talked on Wednesday about the 75% funding on the coast is basically localized. And I'm from Iowa. It's a pretty great place.
Oh, my mother's from Iowa.
So I guess what would be your recommendations? I love working with startups in the area and helping people out. But what would be your recommendations to bring that tech to the Midwest and that are areas that are less served by the tech right now, and to foster that community to grow that?
Yeah, so how to bring entrepreneurship to the Midwest. And even some people are trying to bring it all over the world. For instance, Stripe, I mentioned earlier, this company I'm on the board of has this thing called Atlas, where they will incorporate any startup anywhere in the world. They'll help incorporate them in the US and give them tools. It's a very wonderful thing they're trying to do there. And and so to bring it, I mean, you know, because of the internet, you have so many tools at your disposal that you can get. And you know, part of the magic of being in Silicon Valley is, you know, I can't tell you how many tech people I used to talk with while my kids were playing soccer. You know, they're just everywhere.
Is that a feature or a bug?
Well, sometimes I'd go, hey, I want to, you know, that's my daughter out there. And, but, you know, the density around here is unbelievable, so that you can, you know, you have a community. So, but it doesn't have to be this giant community, but I think a community of entrepreneurial people meeting and talking, you'd be amazed. But the ingredients, you know, are legal people that you know, understand entrepreneurship, so you somehow have to bring them in. You know, you want previous entrepreneurs, and you want financing entrepreneurs, and then you need, you know, the engineers. And so you have to find a way to create all those ingredients locally, and some of it you can do through online mechanisms.
Well, Brad is from West Virginia. He probably talked about what he's doing and Intuit's doing in West Virginia.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a combination of education. You know, they're getting the universities to train people in technology, and the government is supporting, and it's also, both Diane and I have history from Boston. It's also risk-taking. I mean, I always wondered why Silicon Valley didn't start in New England. And the reason is the bankers there wouldn't finance risky businesses, and venture capitalists would. So you have the same mindset.
I have a counterexample.
Yeah, well, now Boston is obviously a very...
No, I mean for here,
for
with
here,
Silicon
for here.
Valley Bank.
The missing ingredient, now electronically everybody's connected, so you could start a company almost anywhere, and lots of them are, you know, being started in Eastern Europe, for example. A lot of programmers are working remotely from there. The venture capitalists have to find these areas somehow. We've got to get the venture capitalists to focus on Iowa and North Dakota and wherever else there could be bright people working.
And of course, the fast ticket to funding is get into Y Combinator out here, and, you know, and go to one of their events and present your company, because everybody wants to fund a Y Combinator. But it's not a requirement to build a big successful company. I think one thing that would be useful is to start highlighting these companies from all over the country, so that people realize how possible it is. Because there's a lot more companies in the Midwest than people, and other parts of the country and world, than people realize. You know, you're not alone. And there's a lot of proof points that you can do it.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.